The Resurrection of J.R., Testing the Ancient Leaf and the Unexpected. The World's Oldest Prophecy, Decoding the Bhrigu Samhita Mystery. Episode 4. As Dave went back and forth over all the permutations that the latest threat brought to bear, he remembered that John Roger had actually visited Sai Baba on a short trip he made to India back in the 1970s. But though J.R. had sponsored many of Sai Baba's ideas and articles in his church's LA-based newspaper, The Movement, they were not aligned in any formal way. Not sure what tomorrow would bring and how to proceed, Dave decided to call it a night and phoned home and talked with his wife and kids, who were enjoying a nice vacation in the surf and sand at the La Jolla Shores Hotel, their annual haunt in the month of August. Jalandhar, Punjab. Dave had never been to Jalandhar, though he had heard much about it. Not being conversant with the city, he let his driver and friend, Happy, show him around. "Why are you going to Jalandhar?" Happy asked while looking over at Dave, who was in the front seat. "Well, it's a long story, but the short version is that I want to know if this ancient astrological leaf is genuine or a hoax." "What kind of astrology?" "You may have heard of the Bhrigu Samhita in Hoshiarpur?" "Certainly, Dave. It is famous for its predictions. Do you doubt it?" "To be honest, yes." Happy then kept quiet, as if thinking what to say next, but decided to stay mum. In the meantime, they arrived at Jasbir Singh's house, which was in a modern development that was part of a new wave of apartments that looked like they were designed by architects living in Orange County, California. The well-appointed building stood in stark contrast with the older, half-built and more dilapidated structures that were but 2 blocks away. Jasbir Singh was outside to greet them. Dave then asked Happy if he wanted to join in the proceedings, but he declined, saying he was going to see an old friend who ran a local chai shop. Inside Jasbir's home, he was welcomed by his wife, Geeta, who very kindly had made an enticing plate of snacks, including some freshly baked vegetarian samosas. After exchanging small talk, Jasbir then led Dave to his office and pulled out a leather pouch. The first thing he showed him was an old photograph of Dave with the shabbed yoga master, Baba Fakir Chand. Fakir was then 92 years old, and Dave was just 22. A 70-year differential, but they had bonded very intensely on their first encounter. Dave's admiration for Fakir's deep insights and profound wisdom had grown exponentially over the years. Fakir had predicted that Dave would become much more skeptical of religion as he matured, and that he would see the underlying truth behind why religious visions were projections of one's own mind, and not due to anything paranormal. On this, Fakir was right on the mark. Then, Jasbir very carefully took out the Bhrigu leaf. It was a small, fragile piece of parchment with frayed edges which curled at each end. It was about 8 by 10 inches. As Dave examined it closely, he was not quite sure what the paper was made out of, but it was distinctly weathered. The ink was faded, but clearer than he had expected after all these years. Dave retrieved his iPhone and took several photographs of the leaf from different angles, including pictures of the back. Jasbir then proceeded to place it back into the leather pouch, but before he could do so, Dave pulled out a clear plastic casing to house the leaf to ensure safe keeping. "Jasbir, I want to have this thoroughly tested. The paper may be old, but the ink could be new, or the ink old and the paper new. Maybe both the ink and the paper are old, but the process of putting them both together is of recent origin. We also need to check the language and several other factors. Doing this correctly is elemental. Otherwise, we could be duped into believing that a forged document is genuine." Jasbir nodded his head in agreement. "Which lab can do such testing?" Jasbir inquired. "Few universities have such facilities, but the University of Delhi has the right equipment for the job. Before I go to Agra, I have a short layover back in Delhi. I will drop off the Bhrigu paper for analysis then. Hopefully, it won't take too long for the chemists there to draw a conclusion. I will be back at the Leela Palace tomorrow." As Dave was getting ready to leave Jasbir Singh's home, He got a text from his school's first credit union in Huntington Beach with an urgent text message to call them immediately. Wanting some privacy, he went into the Jazzbeer's outside veranda. "Hi, this is David Lane. I'm calling back because I got a message that something was up. My account number is—" "Thank you, Mr. Lane, for responding so quickly. We got a notification today that there were a series of suspicious activities on your account, all of them originating out of Houston, Texas. Because of this, we have put a hold on your account." "How did they get access to my credit information?" "We are not sure and our security team is investigating. Sorry for the inconvenience, but we wanted to be aware of the fraudulent transactions, and your card is cancelled. You will not be responsible for the charges. I recommend that you cut up the card as soon as possible." "Thanks for alerting me." As Dave hung up the phone, he got another text, this time from his wife, Andrea, who was in a panic. "Dave, you have been hacked. I'm getting emails from your Yahoo account with all sorts of bizarre religious manifestos. Also, I checked your website and it has been spammed with a massive logo entitled The Watchers, who are everywhere. What's going on? Call me as soon as you get this." Dave knew at once what was happening. The Sai Baba defenders were retaliating, and it was the beginning of a cyber war. This was not unprecedented, as Dave had something similar occur back in 2000 when he was severely hacked by disgruntled cultists, though he never pinpointed exactly who was responsible. The hackers had gotten access to his email account and began sending out letters making all sorts of outrageous claims, which had Dave confessing to being God incarnate, the risen one, and the next mystical traveler. The worst part was that many of his acquaintances, who were on the receiving end, didn't know that Dave's account had been sabotaged. Only time would tell if this latest attack was just a warning or a preview of something much worse. Dave called his wife and tried his best to reassure her. She wasn't buying it, but understood that not much could be done. The key now, he figured, was to stop the digital bleeding and change key passwords and notify various web hosts. Jazzbeer knew something was amiss, seeing Dave's worried expression. "Anything wrong, Dave?" "Well, yes, I got hacked, and I have to do some damage control. Sorry I cannot stay and hang out, but I have to get back to my hotel and see if I can get an earlier flight to Delhi from Amritsar. Not sure if there are evening departures. If all works out, I will drop off the Bhrigu leaf at the University of Delhi for testing sometime tomorrow. We'll keep you posted. Thanks again for everything. Please give my deepest shukriya to your wife, Geeta." Dave had texted Happy, who showed up promptly within 5 minutes after getting the message. "Happy, I need to get back to the Taj Swarna as soon as possible. How long do you think it will take?" "At this time in the afternoon, Dave, there is a lot of traffic, but it should be less than 2 hours." "Okay." The old Grand Trunk Road had been transformed since Dave first travelled on it, but he had fond memories of travelling on it because each time he crossed the long bridge, he could see the shimmering minarets of the Satsang Gar at the Radha Swami Satsang headquarters. This was the colony where his deceased guru, Charan Singh, 1916 to 1990, lived, and it always brought back a flood of very special memories. Charan's death had left a huge vacuum in Dave's spiritual life, and he would often divide his life into 2 halves. Before June 1st, 1990, and after June 1st, 1990. He was grateful for his wife and 2 young boys since they resurrected him from a decade-long depression. Dave wanted to make a short visit to the Radha Swami township, but he was under a time constraint. He was also apprehensive about what lay in store for him. Were these Sai Baba defenders more serious than he realized? Spamming his website and disrupting his credit was bad enough, but could it be much worse? These and other troublesome speculations haunted Dave on the drive back, and he didn't converse as usual. But halfway through the trip, they heard a huge pop. "What the hell was that?" Happy shouted. The car swerved to the right and spun around 180 degrees, ending up on a dusty ravine. Both of them looked at each other, somewhat in disbelief. Getting out, they noticed that both front tires had been punctured as if by a strip of nails. Right then, as they were bending down to assess the damage, a silver sedan accelerated up behind them at a terrific speed, only to stop barely 10 feet away. "What the?" Dave blurted out, followed by a string of profanities that Happy had never heard before. Three men in Punjabi outfits, but without turbans, got out and approached them. "Having car troubles?" "You could say that," Dave replied with an air of exasperation in his voice. "We are here to help." "Great. You wouldn't happen to have two spare tires with you?" Happy responded, somewhat in jest. "No, but we have something much better." Right then, the three men pulled out guns and pointed them directly at Happy and Dave. "Don't move," they said in unison, as if reading from a bad television script. Both of them froze in place, but Dave moved his eyes left to right to see if there were any possible exits. But alas, there were none. They were stuck. "What do you want? Money? Phones?" Dave blurted out. "The car is yours," Happy chimed in. The oldest man of the three assailants, who sported a neatly trimmed beard and was probably not much older than 30, shouted back, "No, we don't want your F-in stuff. We only want one thing, and the professor here hasn't complied. You were warned to take the Sai Baba article down, but you haven't." Dave, with a rush of adrenaline that was similar to the way he felt when ducking diving a huge set while surfing Black's Beach in San Diego, interrupted him and explained, "Wait, I did try to delete it and sent a note to the webmaster at Integral World to take it off immediately, but he is probably out of town. He will do so once he gets my email. So why don't you guys chill? And what's with the guns? It is just an article, for God's sake." Dave was surprised that he wasn't scared. The only real emotion he felt was seething anger. The three men then put their guns back and looked over at each other with self-conscious smirks, as if they were playing a game that only they were privy to and didn't say a word. It appeared to be some sort of bad joke. Dave then tried to ask a series of questions but got no response. The assailants then got back in their car, which Dave noticed had no identification plates, and drove off almost as quickly as they arrived. Happy and Dave looked intensely at each other and ended up hugging, glad they weren't killed or severely injured. "What was that all about?" Happy asked, shaking his head, with his hands still trembling from the close encounter with death. "It's a long story. I'm so sorry you had to be placed in the middle of it. Yet something seems very odd about their threats. They seem to be bluffing as if they were bad actors playing parts in some weirdly orchestrated play. I don't even think they had real guns. But who knows?" Looking over at the flattened tires, Dave then asked, "How are we going to fix your car?" "My Chachaji will help us. I am sure he will know some mechanic that can replace these tires." Happy's uncle, who was a Pathi in the nearby Gurdwara Sri Ramsar Sahib, lived in Raya, which was only 2 kilometers away from where they crashed. In the interim, Dave and Happy both called the Punjab police so they could report on what had happened. After several hours, Dave was back at the Taj Swarna, and he was met in the lobby by two detectives from the Amritsar Police Division. He provided them with a complete account of what occurred and asked that they forward his statement to Detective Ranbir Singh at the Delhi police station. After they took their leave, Dave got a text from the webmaster at Integral World. "Dave, got your urgent message. I took the essay down as per your request. A bit unusual, I must say. Can you explain why?" "It's complicated," Dave wrote back. "We'll have to tell you more in a few days." A sigh of relief came over Dave, and he noticed the tightening in his chest decompressing. "Ah," he thought to himself, "I can finally relax a bit." Dave managed to get a flight out that night on Jet Airways, probably his least favorite Indian airline, but all the other carriers were booked solid. On the short flight, something kept gnawing at the back of his mind. Something didn't make sense. Why couldn't the Psy defenders take down the article themselves? They obviously have sophisticated computer skills if they could hack my email and web accounts. Why go to all this trouble and personally attack me? It doesn't add up. These and other questions kept percolating in Dave's mind, but there was no resolution. He reached out again to the webmaster at Integral World to see if they too had any cyber attacks. The webmaster responded within minutes. Yes, we have counted 18 attempts to circumvent our security, but we have a complex firewall, so they were each unsuccessful. They appear to be originating from Los Angeles, though 2 other locations have blipped on our scans. The University of Delhi. Although Dave had visited the university before, back in 1983, and was somewhat familiar with its layout, he had never been to the chemistry department. Earlier, he had been in contact with Dr. Prem Sharma, a distinguished professor of forensic science. They had arranged to meet at 12:30 in the afternoon in Sharma's office. Dr. Prem Sharma, interestingly, came from a long line of family astrologers, and thus had an abiding interest in the subject, though he was skeptical of its claims. Thank you for meeting me, Dr. Sharma, especially on such short notice. As I mentioned in my emails, I have been given a copy of one of the leaves from the Bhrigu Samhita in Hoshiarpur. My hope is that you and your team can conduct tests on it to determine its age. I did some background research and noticed that you were part of the UPV, EHU's research team along with Rosa Maria Alonso, Professor of Analytical Chemistry from Spain. You have done some groundbreaking work in this area. Yes, I am glad you wrote. I know of the Bhrigu and heard the many legends surrounding it. Professor Alonso had invited me to help assist in developing the dating method. It provides remarkably accurate results. I know you are a busy man, but would it be possible to have this leaf dating tested in the next few days? I am leaving for Agra later this afternoon, as I am scheduled to give a talk at the Dialbag Educational Institute in a couple of days. Perhaps we can communicate by phone or email. I am happy to oblige, since this leaf is a great test for using the dating method. It shouldn't take very long to derive some results. At this juncture, Dave then pulled out the encased Bhrigu leaf and handed it over to Dr. Sharma, who, pausing temporarily to put his reading glasses on, looked very closely at it. It certainly looks old and has definitely seen better days. This should be very interesting. They then both shook hands, and Dr. Sharma showed Dave around the laboratory before departing to get back to work. Dave felt a deep satisfaction for finally getting the leaf into competent hands and hoping that the dating testing would verify once and for all that the so-called ancient astrological leaves were a hoax, most likely generated by astrologers wanting to make a living off naive and unsuspecting believers. For Dave, it was all too obvious. Astrology wasn't a science, but a pseudo-psychological canard. Quantum and Nano-Computing Systems and Applications Conference, Agra, India. After his successful visit to the University of Delhi, Dave met up with some old friends at the Indian International Centre on Max Muller Marg, next to the alluring Lodi Gardens. He had stayed there on several occasions and loved its ideal location. One could eat in the cafe, access the centre's small but refined library, and then stroll for hours enjoying the 15th century Islamic-inspired architecture. He was particularly intrigued by Muhammad Shah's tomb and the tomb of Sikandar Lodi. Here, Dave did some more research about the origins of the Bhrigu Samhita and discovered that there has been a long-standing controversy over which versions of the book were authentic and which were bad imitations. It appeared that there was some competition among various astrologers about who had access to the real Bhrigu, and those who had created fake versions in order to line their pockets. After a few hours of intense study, Dave wanted to go back to the Leela Palace so he could take a leisurely swim in the rooftop pool. He did so, and afterward went to bed early. The Dialbag Educational Institute had arranged for a driver to pick him up early the next morning and drive him to the college. Since in his earlier trips, Dave had taken a train, usually the Taj Express, to Agra, he didn't realize that a new fast highway had been built that allowed cars to go from Delhi to Agra within 3 hours. It was a relatively uneventful drive, though Dave couldn't help but notice how much new construction had begun on the outskirts, especially in Noida. Dave had been invited to give a talk on the physicality of consciousness at the annual Kansas Conference, Quantum and Nano Computing Systems and Applications, at the Dial Bog Educational Institute, which held a special session on consciousness from both Eastern and Western perspectives. Dave's scheduled presentation was mostly focused on the latest advances in neuroscience and how self-reflective awareness has a material basis, a subject for which he had been severely criticized for taking from those who promoted a consciousness-first approach. He suspected the talk would be controversial, especially since the audience, though chock-filled with PhDs from the hard sciences, were formally aligned with Radha Swami's spiritual theology. What should have been a 3-hour ride turned out to be more than 5 hours, and this was mostly due to the heavy traffic leaving Delhi and the very congested streets within Agra proper. He had reservations at the Sheraton Mughal, which had been bought out by the ITC Hotel Group. He liked the hotel very much for its 3 pools, several gardens, and its rooftop observation tower, which provided a bird's-eye view of the Taj Mahal. Although not as new or as plush as the Oberoi Amavilas, the ITC Mughal was one of the 3 most luxurious hotels in the city. Because it was the off-season, Dave was given a 2-bedroom suite overlooking the gardens. The weather was much milder than he had expected. The late night and early morning rains had dropped the temperature down from 37 to 32 Celsius. There was also a much welcome breeze. Remarkably comfortable, Dave remarked to himself, for this time of year. Sitting at his desk in his room, Dave started scrolling through his emails and text messages to see if there was anything new. During the journey, he had been out of internet range. Mostly what he saw was junk. But 2 notifications caught his eye. The first was a voicemail. Dr. Lane, this is Ranbir Singh, Delhi Police. The Amritsar detectives have found an abandoned silver Maruti Chiaz sedan without identification plates. It matches the description of the car that the assailants used. We have gone through it for fingerprints, but it was wiped clean as far as we can tell at this end. We did find a receipt, though, from Satyanam Cyber Cafe in Aerocity, adjacent to the airport. We are on our way there now to check their records. We'll be in contact. Dave felt that this latest lead could prove fruitful. The second one was a text from Raj Khanna inviting Dave to see him at Swami Bog later that night if he could arrange it. Thinking over Khanna's invitation, he was at first confused about who he was. Then, in a few seconds, he got his bearings straight and remembered it was the contact that the Twitchelians had connected him with. Dave very much wanted to see the finished temple at Swami Bach, which took over 100 years to build and was advertised in the latest tourist brochures to be a rival to the Taj Mahal. Because Khanna's home was across the street from Dial Bog, Dave figured he would also have enough time to check out the audio-visual technology that would be available for his talk. He particularly wanted to make certain that he could connect his iPad so he could use his interactive iBook, which he had specially created for the conference. Dave made a blunder, though, since he didn't realize how bad the traffic could be at 6 p.m. Although he only had to drive 13 kilometers, it took nearly an hour to reach Swami Bog from the ITC Mughal. Driving through Agra was a unique experience. Many of the streets were exactly the same as they were 40 years ago, lined as they are with all sorts of small and intriguing shops, selling anything from used tires to saris to soft drinks with names such as Thumbs Up and Limca to garish pictures of Ganesha and Shiva. Dave loved every moment of it, especially since the colors, sounds, and smells were so vivid and so alive. Dave had been to Swami Bog several times before, but he had never met Raj Khanna. He wasn't quite sure what to expect, and after all that had happened in the days prior. Moreover, Dave wasn't all that interested in doing more research on Sudha Singh or Rebazar Tars. He knew from his extensive study in this area that they were figments of Paul Twitchell's overextended imagination. Raj Khanna was outside of the Swami Bog main gate to welcome his new guest. He smiled broadly and, putting his hands together and in a clear, resonant voice, said, "Radha Swami, Professor Lane, I am so happy to finally meet you. I have read many of your books, and I am a great fan of your Neural Surfer website. So pleased that you are here." "Very kind of you to say, Mr. Khanna. I too am happy to meet you in such auspicious surroundings. Saying these words, Dave looked up at the magnificent Sarmod, which was but 300 yards away from where they stood. It was at one end smaller than he remembered, at least the base, and taller at the dome than he expected it would be, topped as it was with a glistening gold crown. He could see that there were still some final touches to be completed. "Oh yes, most certainly. What an achievement. Do you care to pay your respects?" inquired Raj Khanna. "You must have been reading my mind," Dave replied with a big grin. Walking beside Raj, Dave figured that his host was about 5 foot, 5 inches or so, with closely cropped black hair and a slight mustache. He also had a marked limp in his left leg. Dave guessed that Raj was in his late 30s, though he could have been much older. They then took their shoes off at the designated stand and proceeded to walk in their socks down to the inner sanctum, where life-size portraits of Shiv Dayal Singh and his wife, Rah Daji, were hung. These were portioned off by an intricately designed marble courtyard that was about 4 or so feet in height. As one approached the picture of Shiv Dayal Singh, there was a small opening where the sacred sandals of the Guru were fastened to a marble slab so that devotees could bow their heads upon them for a few seconds and receive the deceased master's divine blessing. Raj Khanna went first, and Dave followed, thankful that he was second so as to rightly mimic how to perform such mini puja. As Dave bowed down and placed his head on the sandals, he felt a peculiar sensation pass through his body, thinking for a moment that perhaps there was some sort of electric current being piped in through the shoes, unbeknownst to the pilgrims. But Dave quickly put such a thought out of his mind, commenting to himself that sometimes skepticism can go too far, Dave. Keep an open mind and don't turn into a curmudgeonly old cynic. Enjoy the ride. Raj then walked briskly with Dave to show him the sacred well that the founder of the Radha Swami used when he was alive. It too had become a sacred site, and devotees would often go there to receive inspiration and to offer up prayers. Right then, to Dave's embarrassment, his phone rang, disturbing the peaceful night air. He had forgotten to turn it to mute. "Sorry about that, Raj. I'm so grateful it didn't buzz earlier." "No trouble, Professor. I perfectly understand." Looking down at his phone, he saw that it was Dr. Sharma from the University of Delhi, even though Dave knew it was impolite to take the call right there, and then he didn't want to miss what Sharma might say. So he excused himself from Raj and quickly ran over to a secluded spot in the outlying garden. "Hi, this is Dr. Sharma from the University of Delhi. Sorry to call you at night, but I wanted to reach you as soon as I could." "No, I'm so glad you called. Any news?" There was a slight pause on the phone, and Dave thought he might have lost his connection. Then Dr. Sharma, in a low voice, sounding as if he was the conveyor of tragic news, said, "We have finished our preliminary testing of the Bhrigu Samhita leaf. Although our recent studies have been performed on modern ink fluids, such as ballpoint pens, we decided to use gas chromatography and mass spectrometry as our chosen analytical platform. We also tested the bromine solution of the paper by very carefully removing a 1/4 inch from the corner where there was no writing. In addition, we did a nitric acid resistance examination." Dave was appreciative of the scientific protocols and Dr. Sharma's obvious diligence in this regard. He knew that this rigorous type of chemical inspection would prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the Bhrigu Samhita was of recent origin and a mythological foil for professional astrologers to extract more money from those steeped in superstition. Dr. Sharma continued, but with a rising edge in his voice. "So, after completing our battery of tests, we discovered to our utter shock that the Bhrigu leaf dates back to the mid-part of the 15th century. We determined, and I am sure this will come as a complete surprise to you, that the paper and ink were compressed together around the same time period, some 6 centuries ago. Our best guess is that the paper on which the astrological readings were printed was produced in Kashmir, since it is almost identical to what Sultan Zain al-Abidin first manufactured and sold extensively during the last decade of his life. What? No, that cannot be right. How could something that old have my name on it? Dave was in a mild state of shock. Not to be disrespectful, Dr. Sharma, but is this some sort of joke? No, we too are in disbelief. All of us in the lab are not sure what to make of it. Dave couldn't speak for a few moments, and then looked upward at the towering mausoleum, which was now shining bright against the darkened Indian sky, with lights cascading off its enlarged dome. His body felt numb, as if he had just heard that a loved one had died. Speaking in a voice that was almost inaudible, Dave finally mustered up words that seemed even unreal to him. The Bhrigu Samhita is genuine. Then, echoing the exact words he said to his friend Jeff, but without his earlier conviction and certainty, he said to Dr. Sharma, but more to himself, "This is not believable, not even slightly.